This conference will now be recorded.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength, my rock, my redeemer. Greetings, everyone. Time for another Connect the Dots session. And today will be session number 12. And I'm going to do it on the use of trumpets, the trumpet aspect of the return of Christ. So this ties very closely with session 11 on the cloud aspect of the return of Christ. And just like that subject, the one on the trumpet aspect of the return of Christ has deep, deep roots in the Old Testament. The foundational passages that are used in the New Testament are drawn from passages in the Old Testament. And when Christ and others in the New Testament spoke about the trump aspect of his return, they had in mind the Old Testament scriptures that we're getting ready to read. And I'm really hoping in these connect the dot sessions to show the unity, the harmony, the continuity of the Bible. It's one book, has major themes that begin in the first few books and are carried all the way through to the book of Revelation. And so many make the mistake when they're studying the end times and the return of Christ and the various parts of it to go straight to Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, or right to Paul's writings in Thessalonians, or especially Revelation. And the mistake that is made is taking those verses that speak about these particular parts of it as if they're in a vacuum and were not even thought of or had no uh, direct reference to those things in what we call the Old Testament, the Tanakh. And trumpets is no different. So we're going to read a number of passages in the Old Testament before we even get to the New Testament. And most people understand that in history, trumpets were used by lots of different nations and peoples. Armies would use them. They would be used in celebration, they would be used to call the people together for different functions. Um, and the different trumpet signals would be understood by the people. Uh, and, even in our day, not so much currently, but leading up to our day, the last century even, trumpets were used often in battle times uh, to signal the movement of troops or to sound retreat or charge or various things like that, trumpets and bugles. And the Bible is no different, but the context of what leads up to the return of Christ and the use of trumpets there is what we're going to focus on. And we're going to begin in Exodus 19. And Exodus 19 is one of the pivotal key chapters of the Old Testament because that's when they came to Mount Sinai in the third month after they had left Egypt. And Moses immediately goes up Mount Sinai to meet with God. And he has a series of meetings up and down Mount Sinai during the year or so that they're at Mount Sinai. And God is giving him the law and other instructions about what he wants from them as they move through the wilderness to the promised land. And uh, these verses I'm getting ready to read, even though they happen back there, they have a real second coming end times sound to them because the themes from here are captured and taken right into the New Testament. So uh, in Exodus 19, picking up in verse 11, uh, and let them be ready for the third day, which is full of meaning in itself. For on the third day, the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people all around. Take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Not a hand shall touch him, but he will surely be stoned or shot with an arrow, whether man or beast. He shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, so that's our first clue or key. It's a long sound, because we're going to see that taken into the New Testament. They shall come near the mountain. And then skipping down to verse 16, then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain. And the sound of the trumpet was very loud. So we add loud to long, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Now Mount Sinai was completely, verse 18, in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. So the Lord descended at the sound of a long and loud trumpet. So we're really laying principles down that are important for later passages. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, so now we have long and loud together, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. So these are really important verses to lay a groundwork for what later passages talk about regarding trumpets and God's presence and God ascending and clouds and smoke and fire and earthquakes. And all that kind of language is second coming language. And it's used way back there at Mount Sinai. Then we go to Leviticus, where it lays down a number of laws. Leviticus chapter 23. And of course, the 23rd chapter of Leviticus is another key pivotal chapter because it describes the feasts of the Lord, the 7 annual feasts, and then in verse 3, the weekly Sabbath. So again, this idea of 7 plus 1 equals 8. It's found all through the scriptures. Leviticus 23, and then the Lord, verse 23. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath rest, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. Uh, it's often called Yom Teruah. The Day of Trumpets is most translated that way, but literally it simply means the day of noise, lots of noise taking place. You shall do no customary work on it. You shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. So one of the 7 holy feast days, every year, the first day on the 7th month, trumpets would be blown because that was the signal that it was at the end of the year, which is kind of fascinating to me because these 7 annual feasts end with trumpet blowing, or very close to the end with trumpet blowing. The 7th month, which is the final month of their feasts. So, at least in my mind, it also includes the principle of the timing of when the last trumpet or the trumpet signaling the Lord's coming will be at the end of that 7-year period. And then in chapter 25, we find something interesting. There's another time that special trumpets are to be blown, and that's the Jubilee year. So, verse 8, chapter 25, and you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. And the time of the 7 Sabbaths shall be 49 years. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day, because that's the Day of Atonement. And normally a trumpet would not be blown on the Day of Atonement. But at the start of the Jubilee year, it is. So again, the idea of a trumpet being blown at the end annually of the holy feast days But at the start of a Jubilee year, which is a reset year, kind of like a new beginning for them, and I carry that idea over then also into the idea that the trumpet sound in the New Testament passages is not only signaling the end of the tribulation period and the return of Christ, but the beginning of the millennium. So it's both a sound of at the end of something and at the beginning of something. I think a lot of people miss that aspect. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, you shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all the land. And you shall consecrate the 50th year, proclaim liberty throughout all the land to its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his possession, each shall return to his family. And then we move to Isaiah, and this one becomes important because this really puts it even more so into an end time setting in its context. Um, and for instance, at the first verse of chapter 27, I read about the Antichrist figure. Uh, in that day, the Lord with his severe sword, great and strong, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he shall slay the reptile that is in the sea. That is very Lucifer, Antichrist, the beast from the sea, and the slaying and punishing of them language. And so this whole chapter is talking about that time, the restoration of Israel. And then we pick up this in 27 and 13. So it will be in that day, the great trumpet will be blown. And the New Testament uses this idea of trumpet and great trumpet, sound of the great trumpet. They're thinking of Isaiah 27:13, both Jesus and Paul, when they use that terminology. The great trumpet will be blown. They will come who are about to perish in the land of Assyria, and they who are outcast in the land of Egypt, and shall worship the Lord in the holy mount at Jerusalem. That's a millennial setting. Then we move on to Brother Joel. See what Joel has to say. He likes trumpets. He mentions trumpets a few times in his little book. So Joel chapter 2 and verse 1. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming, for it is at hand. Um, the day of the Lord is the actual return of Christ. And it begins that 1,000-year day of the Lord, the seventh millennium, we call the millennial time. And so this sounding of a trumpet is connected with the day of the Lord. And it sounds an alarm, but it's going to result in great danger for most and rescue for others. And further in chapter 2 in verse 15, blow the trumpet in Zion, consecrate a fast, call a sacred assembly. And it will be a sacred assembly. He's going to gather the outcasts. He's going to gather those safe in the wilderness. He's going to bring them back into their land. They're going to be safe and live in righteousness and peace and safety for 1,000 years. So that will be truly a sacred assembly. And then in Zephaniah, we'll see what Brother Zephaniah has to say. Zephaniah in chapter 1, verse 14. The great day of the Lord is near. It is near and hastens quickly. The noise of the day of the Lord is bitter. There the mighty men shall cry out. So again, connection with the day of the Lord, which is the actual return of Christ. That day is a day of wrath, and it certainly will be. A day of trouble and distress, a day of devastation and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of trumpet and alarm against the fortified cities and against the high towers. Because that last great trumpet, that seventh trumpet, when the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of Christ, Revelation says, is also the time he defeats his enemies. And so, of course, it's going to be a day of darkness and gloom because he's going to uh, have vengeance on his enemies. Let's move now to Zechariah. So we're just about to the end of the Old Testament, the Tanakh, and see what Brother Zechariah has to say. Zechariah 9 and verse 14. Then the Lord will be seen over them. And his Revelation 1:7 there, huh? He's coming in the clouds, and every eye shall see him. Then Zechariah 9:14, then the Lord will be seen over them, and his arrow will go forth like lightning. Well, Jesus uses that lightning analogy in Matthew 24. The Lord God will blow the trumpet and go with whirlwinds from the south, because he's gone down to Bozrah to defeat the immediate enemies there. They're trying to destroy Israel, destroy Jerusalem. The armies involved in all that. And so he goes down there first, then marches his way back north through the eastern gate into the city of Jerusalem. And then we move to Daniel to, let's go to the words of Jesus now in Matthew 24. These famous group of verses, 29 through 31, the more I read them, the more I study them, the more I meditate on them, it's like a whole prophetic end times description in these three verses. Matthew 24:29, immediately after the tribulation of those days. What tribulation? Well, when you see the abomination of desolation in verse 15, then, verse 21, there shall be great tribulation. And then that lasts 3.5 years. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man, there's Daniel 7:13, will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. There's the cloud aspect. Now the trumpet aspect, which is directly connected to the cloud. So those who say the cloud coming is 7 years before the trumpet part, uh, you can't make it fit in this passage. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. Didn't we read in Isaiah 27:13 that it's a great trumpet? God will blow a great trumpet. He will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together. Of course, the gathering together, as 2 Thessalonians 2:1 explains, 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 17, the gathering together is a combination of the resurrection of dead saints and the rapture of living saints. Together, they are a gathering together. He will send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Some say this is only an application to Israel as the elect, gathering together at his return. Uh, Others say the elect there are the church saints that are alive at that time. But there will be, in a real sense, a double gathering, won't there be? There'll be a gathering of his saints to himself in the air, and there will be a gathering of the scattered Jews throughout the world to come back to their land. Their Messiah is here. So either one would fit. I think both are true, and certainly the elect would be the church saints, but the uh, Israel at that time will become the elect again, grafted back into their own olive tree. So you could apply it to them. And then 1 Corinthians 15 and 52, 51 and 52. This is the resurrection chapter, and he says in verse 51, Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. So, when is the resurrection of the dead? At the last trump. So, we do know that there are 7 trumpets sounding in the book of Revelation. So, I guess a pre trib rapture position would be forced to say there is a last trump before the last 7 trumps. How else would you say it? The last trump, if it's before the tribulation, uh, is uh, is before 7 other trumps that come after it. That really doesn't make sense logically, but many try to make it fit. The last trumpet. What is the last trumpet that we know about or that we hear about? Um, well, we'll get to that in just a minute, but we're trying to go in order as best we can. So now we go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 16. We've already read this verse several times in other lessons. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up. So there's the gathering together, the resurrected ones and the raptured ones. When is the last trumpet that Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians 15:52? What is the last trumpet mentioned in the Bible in an end time setting? Well, it's the 7th trumpet during the Great Tribulation time. And it says in chapter 10 and verse 6, it's important to read this one because of its connection to Exodus 19. So in Revelation 10 and 6, well, verse 5, the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised up his hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that are in it, the earth and the things that are in it, the sea and the things that are in it, that there should be delay no longer. So in my mind, this 7th trumpet takes us all the way to the end. But in the days of the sounding, so the plural days, remember Exodus 19 said the trumpet sounded long and loud and got louder. And I really think this 7th trumpet is not going to be a short blast, but a long, loud blast that may last for hours or even days. As it says here, in the days of the sounding of the 7th angel, which is the trumpet, when he is about to sound, the mystery of God would be finished. So the 7th trumpet takes us all the way to the end, as he declared to his servants, the prophets. I was raised with a mid-tribulation position, and I'm really thankful I was because it is the least common or popular. Pre-tribulation, very popular. Post-tribulation, quite popular. Mid-tribulation, not so popular. But the reason I was taught that it's our rapture resurrection is in the middle of the 70th week is because uh, of the way the trumpets were placed by those who taught me this. And they taught that each of the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls of wrath, each set of 7 went through its complete cycle before the next group started. And therefore, they placed the 7th trumpet at the middle. So I was taught a 7th trumpet rapture resurrection, which I was thankful. But in my own studies, I've moved that 3.5 years later to the end of the tribulation period. And that's when is this long and loud trumpet actually mentioned by name? In Revelation 11:15. Then the 7th angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of our Lord, of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Well, that kind of nails it down, doesn't it? At the sounding of the 7th trumpet, ever how long it blows, certainly not 3.5 years. but a certain number of days, maybe that extra 30 days or extra 45 days at the end of the book of Daniel, because a lot is happening. He's fighting battles, he's conquering enemies, he's gathering his people, he's eventually heading to Jerusalem to take over as king. And so, ever how long that takes, there may be this trumpet blast lasting during that whole period of time. So, I'll just close with this kind of question I like to ask, because these four main passages in the New Testament speaking about the trumpet sound at the return of Christ. It is clear that the trumpet sound in Matthew 24:29 through 31 is immediately after the tribulation. And there's a gathering together. There can be no denial about those two things. The trumpet sound by John in Revelation, the seventh trumpet, is also at the end when the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of Christ. So, my simple question is the post tribulation trumpet of Jesus in Matthew 24 and the post tribulation trumpet of John in Revelation 11 the same as or different from the last trumpet of Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:52 and the great trumpet in 1 Thessalonians 4:16? And a pre-tribulation rapture position says that the trumpets of Jesus and John are different from the trumpets of Paul. And yet Paul never implies or hints in any way that the trumpets he's talking about is any different than the trumpet of Jesus and John. And some will say, well, maybe Paul wrote his before Matthew was popular and before Revelation was written. So Paul wouldn't have even known about those references. But, all of his disciples on the Mount of Olives heard him say that it was after the tribulation. Paul spent a good amount of time with the apostles, no doubt got a lot of his information from them in his writings. Uh, and uh, and many of those who knew the apostles and knew Christ personally, that message of Jesus about that post-tribulation trumpet would be well known, well known. And when Paul brought them up in his writings, he would have already known what Jesus said about it. Oral tradition was huge among Jewish believers. Those kind of stories would be spoken of often. So that argument that Paul didn't even know about those. I mean, when John later received his revelation of the seven trumpets, he was there when Jesus called it a post tribulation trumpet and a gathering together. And so all of these would have had interactions with Paul. He would not have been ignorant of what Jesus and John knew about the trumpets that they would that would end up in writings of what they saw and said. Anyway, I hope you get something out of this session. I pray that it be a blessing to you, that you'll study on your own, develop your own opinions, reach your own conclusions. I'm just trying to give you the information in an organized, ongoing fashion through the Bible, and giving some commentary, which makes it obvious what my position is, but hoping that you can do this on your own, reach your own conclusions. So may God bless.